Did you know that there are many spots where GTO is pretty nonchalant about whether you should bluff?
Bluffing is microscopically losing. You should bluff 42% of the time. It doesn't matter what you do. Nothing ever matters.
How boring. The good news is that in many of these spots in the real world against humans, it's absolutely printing money to bluff. It's a travesty not to. I'm going to show you a few of these spots today. If you have a red line that looks like this, then there's a very high chance you haven't discovered these spots yet. By the end of this video, once you practice these patterns a little bit, I would like to think we can get your red line looking a bit more like this. Before we get to the video, if you like the way we teach poker here at Carrot Corner, don't forget to check out carrotcorner.com for our paid content, especially our comprehensive mammoth cash game theory course, the Carrot Poker School. Exploits are lovely, but it really helps to have a bedrock of theory to place them on. Now let's get to today's video. Well, I hope you like the new table backdrop. We've got the flames going on here because these bluffs are on fire. These bluffs we're going to make today, they are on fire, guys. Not in the sense that they're theoretically accurate, not that kind of on fire, but on fire in the sense that they're just going to perform really well against your real life opponents, especially at low micro stakes. All kinds of weaker players that you play against, with the exception, of course, of massive calling stations. And then at the other end of the spectrum, really strong GTO-like robot regs, going to be less good against them as well, but these bluffs are going to be great against 80-90% of your opponents. So we flat a 3-bet here against the hijack as the under the gun opener, and the flop comes king, queen, 10 rainbow. We go for a check, villain bets. I think you can call or raise here. Raise is a weird play. Villains shouldn't do too much jam here when you raise because they're going to have hands like top set, second set, straight that really don't garner a lot of protection by jamming, and you're going to have a really polarized range. I guess there's some denial to your pocket jacks if they want to jam here, but as long as you're sure your opponent isn't the type to play a lot of jam on this flop, then you can for sure raise here. Against a recreational player, you don't ever want to raise here because they are just going to get excited and jam their hand even though they're in position. So we go for a call here without too much of a read on who our opponent actually is. The 3 of hearts rolls off on the turn. If we face a bet, it's going to be a bit of a tricky gross spot, but it goes check check and we land on the 6 of clubs river. This might be a good opportunity to just have a think about what you think the hijack's range is here. What do they have? What do they get to this spot with? The theoretical answer is that they should get here with a bunch of slow plays. They can have some ace-jack, believe it or not, at this SPR, because they can always just check back and jam the river or raise your bet. They're in position, so the need to build the pot here is just not going to be that high. If they're out of position, they could also check and go for some check jam or something like that too. But there are some slow plays here in GTO, top set, second set, straight, that kind of thing. In the real world, I think people are going to be far more capped than that. Their range is going to be mostly things like aces, ace, king, ace, queen, queen, jack suited, pocket jacks, jack 10 suited, maybe some king, jack suited, maybe some 9s or 8s, stuff like this. So overall, we do have a bit of showdown value here. That's to say that the EV of checking is probably positive because I can, of course, envision some lines where we check here and villain checks back with ace 10 or 10-9 suited or pocket 9s or something like that and decides not to bluff. The problem is that they sometimes will bluff with those hands and then we won't get the free showdown. We'll have to think about calling, and that's fraught with all kinds of other dangers. And then the other problem is just that, well, what if bet is just way better than that? It might not be enough to settle for a line that's quite good EV if the other line is better, right? We should always be comparing and contrasting hands as poker players, not just going, oh, I have a reason for X, so I do X. That's called insufficient reasoning. So all being said and done here, I decided that in game the pool's range is played at 100. Russian cash on GG, but the regs are not that strong. I'm sorry guys, no offense, maybe some of you are good, but most of you kind of suck. Like really badly at cards, yeah? You really suck at cards. Nah, but in all seriousness, it's not that strong a pool. People are too capped here. I decided to go for this. We can of course still have a set of 10s, we can have king queen, we can have ace jack suited. We don't rep a ton of hands here, but it's also really hard for us to be bluffing at the same time when we've already filtered our own range by calling the flop. This is a play that I don't think is great theoretically. I do think that this play in real life is very, very good. I don't think we're going to get looked up by aces, ace, king, ace, queen, all that frequently, king, jack, that sort of thing. I just don't think the pool is happy enough here to make those lookups. It's just a very scary board. It's just a line they're not going to face very often as well. Not many people are going to overbet this river having called flop. And not many people in pool are going to be able to turn a hand like Jack 10 or Jacks into a bluff at decent frequency here. And those hands really are the bottom of our range. We don't really call the flop with 9s or 8s or 7s in this case. So theoretically, this is probably fine, actually. I just think you'd be using the overbet at sparing frequency. You wouldn't be using it that often. We do get it through on this occasion. I know, guys, maybe I was bluffing against 8s. I'm so clever, I got him to fold 8s. That's not the point, though. We're trying to get this player off of hands like ace, queen, king, jack, ace, king, aces, queen, jack, etc. So I think overall the play does a decent job of that, and I don't think we run into nutted stuff all that frequently, though in theory we're probably meant to sometimes. 7-3 suited now, and we go for the call here, blind versus blind, a little bit loosey-goosey as Daniel Negreanu might say. He would also talk about eating sandwiches as a related point. 7-3 of spades is fine. If you have any skill edge at all, this hand is not just going to be playable, but it's actually mandatory. It doesn't take much to swing this to being positive, and in some of your rake structures and range charts, this will indeed be a call. If you play tournaments, be very used to calling in a spot like this. You probably don't want to play tournaments though, because they will suck out the will to live, and you will end up a hollow shell of a poker player. If you play tournaments, you will be done for. Don't do it, it's not worth it. Even if you bink one and get to post a picture of you holding 8-4 off on Twitter, it's still not worth it, don't do it. So Villain decides to bet the flop, and this is laughable because we know they're doing this with everything and then not defending properly against aggression and future aggression. So we call. The pool is just bad at defending after they range bet, guys. It's a known fact, especially when their range sprawls over about 600 combos or whatever they have pre here. The 9 of clubs comes on the turn, a horrible card for our hand, a delicious card for our range, an even more delicious card for our range after our opponent checks. When you have a strong range, a weak hand, and you think your opponent is overfolding, guess what you should do?
Well, I think you should copy GTO and roll the RNG.
No, you shouldn't. You should just bet. Because this bet, and then the one I'm going to make on the river, because I'm just always going to bet the river next, because nobody is good at check calling turn with the nut flush, even though it's the thing in theory to do that in slow play, and tailor your line against your opponent's bluffs. No one thinks like this at low stakes. They just think, oh, I don't like this, I check. The faster this check is, the brighter the green light for making this play. We get it through, we're folding out some better hands, we're folding out random Jack X, we're folding out some random 9X probably, some better 7X like King 7, Ace 7. We're also folding out hands that are just incredibly live against us, like the Ace 8 of diamonds. And when we fire the river barrel and we overbet the pot or whatever we're going to do exploitatively, probably also print there. So this is the kind of bluff that in part relies on another really successful bluff in the future to be good, but it also folds out some better hands and live hands immediately. This is a bluff protection bet, as I might say, in the Carrot Poker School. Win-win. Okay, next spot. King Queen off on the button, we go for a 2.5x raise, get called from big blind, and the flop is Jack 4-7. Gonna big bet or check here, it doesn't really matter. Go for the big bet this time. I tend to use bigger bets on those flops for reasons that are incredibly nerdy and not that important, so who cares if you want a small bet there? Don't worry, you can still beat the games, it's okay. Ace turn, I think we've got a little bit of showdown here. The hand could bluff probably, but checking is also fine. I'm just going to be rolling, quite honestly, between a B75 and a check. I tend not to use overbets on the ace turn, because what it does is it just renders my opponent's range a little bit more, shall we say, like semi-polar? Not polar at all, but it does add some polarization to some regions. For example, like ace 4, ace 7, ace jack, ace X in general are just really powerful hands now, and other stuff has been demoted beyond all belief. Something like 6s or 3s or whatever has just become much weaker now. Something like 8, 9 has become terrible. Villain has a lot of really automatic folds and automatic calls here if we go big, so I'd go a little bit less big when I bet turn. The river is the 3 of spades, and bet check bet on certain boards is one of the most printing lines at low stakes. The reason that this line tends to print is that people are not very good at slow playing the river. When you're out of position, the solver will demand that you have a whole host of slow plays, most of them hands that block my check back turn and pay off river range. So if Villain has a hand like Jack 7 here, that's an incredibly good hand to go for a check raise on the river with, because it unblocks my value region by unblocking an ace, unblocks my air region, because you can hardly block air when you have 2 cards that are paired on the board, and basically polarizes my range to a certain extent. We talk about this in grade 2, lecture 5 of the Carrot Poker School. And so we end up making this bet on the river, as long as we think the pool arrives with a bit too much 4x, 5s, 6s, 8s, 9s, 7x, etc., 3-6 suited, deuces, you name it, hands like this, then we're going to do just fine with this bet. We could also overbet here, because we could play 5-6 or ace 3 or even some ace 10 or ace 9 that way at this juncture, so overbet's fine. Big bet's okay as well. I think this is a really bread and butter bluff spot. In theory, the only thing that like makes me not love this as much is that in theory, the opponent's meant to block bet a ton of their Jack X on the river, but I think they'll arrive with too much of that. The good thing is that we did block that with this hand. So they're meant to be 33, I think, with a lot of Jack X here. And we blocked the King Jack and Queen Jack that they might accidentally check. So I think this hand is better blocker-wise to bet in real life than it is in GTO. Ace 5 of hearts now. On the button, we go for a 3-ball. Villain goes for the call, and we get a board of 8, 7, 6. A hideous board for our range. If you run your sims, your solves, with donk bets enabled, you'll probably see the cutoff elect to donk this board at quite a high frequency. If you don't, then what you'll see is the button will check back at quite a high frequency because they expect the cutoff to be slow playing too many of their good hands that they should have been donking in pure GTO. So actually, when this player doesn't donk in reality here, because humans almost never do, their range gets a bit more polar and a bit stronger than normal because they've not built in that donk bet. Therefore, we want to play a lot of check back. We know people are terrible at slow playing the turn, so we know we're going to get a ton of transparency in the node that follows. When villain checks here, we are of course in a classic underprotected node. If you think about our value region now, it's aces, it's kings, it's queens, it's jacks, it's overpairs mainly, stuff like this. No guys, we don't always bet the flop with our overbets because we don't utterly suck at cards. It's not that difficult. You check back sometimes, it's a horrible board for your range. No, you don't have to bet aces. Fine, if you don't believe me, don't believe me. I'll save it for the comments, man, I can't be bothered. You don't have to bet aces. Anyway, those are our value region. So we go for the massive bet. Not because we're balancing and we would do this with aces. We're not that obsessed with balance. The thing is that when pool doesn't protect its checking range and beating 100 NL Russian cash is all about pillaging people's underprotected checking ranges, the best thing you can do with your bluffing region is to scare the hell out of them, especially deep. In fact, I could even have gone for a bigger overbet here. When you're deep, this is a really key exploit, these large overbets terrify people. They sort of suggest to villain, hey, if you call here, the pot's going to become like 60 bigs, and I might just rip it for like 2 and a bit X pot on the river. Then what are you going to do? We could even check back here with a hand like pocket sixes. It could happen. You can play sixes that way in GTO, in spots where it's good for your opponent's range and they're meant to lead the turn all the time. You're allowed to slow play some sets on the flop. I know it's weird, but it's a thing. Anyway, we go for this. Obviously, we get the fold because we're only showing you hands that we get through today because we need you to think that we win every single hand. That's what good players do. We win every single hand. Easy. All right, ace 4 off. Go for an open on the button. Big blind peels. Queen 5-3 rainbow. Big blind checks, we could better check here, we go for the small bet. I slightly prefer betting here, but not by much. My only slight argument for betting is that when you're against a weaker player, it can be good to bet nutted draws. Okay, it's not quite a nutted draw, but it's a pretty damn amazing situation if a deuce ever rolls off on the turn. Villain raises, and guess what the turn is, guys? That's right, not a deuce, because if it was a deuce, this would not be a good hand to include in a video about bluffing. The turn is a 6 though, which gives us some extra equity and does give us the right to farm this bet. Farm this bet for 2 things. Can you name them? Why do we call this turn bet? Which 2 factors described in grade 1 of the Carrot Poker School are responsible for this call? Can you tell me in the comments? I believe that you haven't heard the answer. I believe that you're writing it right now. So do pause and write in the comments what 2 variables do this. That's right. The first variable that we're farming for is implied odds. When we make a straight with a deuce or a 7, we're going to win a pretty amazing sized pot. The deuce and 7 of clubs are not that tainted when it's only a backdoor flush draw here either. So happy days on the implied odds front. The second thing that's really cool here is future fold equity. If we call and villain decides to check, this was a known weaker player, so their range is going to be full of Queen X here, 1 pair hands, stuff like this, very few slow plays. We know that recreational players are not the biggest fans of flushes coming in, so we rip it. This is a really cool spot to bluff in. In GTO, this is a great bluff spot as well. You probably do some weird stuff with sizing in theory, where some of your weaker flushes go smaller, your bigger flushes jam, and maybe this hand bets smaller more often than it bets bigger or something like that. Another thing that might happen in theory is that you have some showdown value with this hand, because villain has a hand like 8-7 with a backdoor. I don't think that's what the weaker player's range really is here. I think it's much more to the tune of Queen X or 9s that just merge, just silly merges and stuff like that. Mainly 1 pair. Maybe even some counterfeited hand like Queen 3 or something like that. So yeah, I think this is a mandatory bluff spot. Their range is going to be really capped by jamming I think we do really well. I think if you go smaller here, it'll still be a good bluff. I think by going all in, you will get much more fold equity. I think this is quite an elastic spot, actually, where people are somewhat sensitive to the increase in sizing from about 75% pot through to the all in. So if the solver does tell you that you have a decent amount of showdown value in this spot, I don't think that's so much the case against a weaker player here. Villain tanked for a very long time here before making this fold. I think these spots where, you know, you've strengthened your range by calling multiple streets of aggression and then you've been checked to, they're meant to be extremely high fold equity spots in GTO. I don't think it's that different here. I don't think we'll get looked up by the king, queen, queen, jack sort of portion of villain's range very frequently here at all. There'll also be some weird merges like 6-7, 6-4 in there, of course, which we definitely want to fold out with ace high. There'll also be some ace high in there as well, believe it or not, because fish are weird. They do weird stuff with ace 10 of diamonds sometimes. They don't really know how to construct their turn bluffing range. This stuff exists. We have the ace 6 of spades here in the hijack. Go for an open, get called by cutoff. This is a spot where check raise is pretty good against a recreational player. They're typically going to be betting a bit too loose here. Betting some mergy hands, some bluffs that they really shouldn't be, betting ace-jack just for the sake of it, that kind of thing. This time it checks through, and again, this spot's not very exciting, but I just want to keep hammering home this pattern over and over and over again in the hope that eventually you guys stop showing down ace-high in this spot. I know it's going to take some time because you guys love to do that, but eventually you're going to stop it, and I'm going to be happy, and you're going to be happy because your red line's going to be way better. So we go for the large bet, which is just kind of bread and butter here. We have an overcard. Like, the biggest mistake you can make here is to check down by saying either A, I will win sometimes by checking down. Okay, that might be true. Like, you might get lucky and run into like a jack 10 that decided not to bluff you, or some 8-9 that was just a passive fish checking to showdown. The thing is, you do better by bluffing. So it's not about just taking a play that you think is plus EV. It is, of course, your mission to always try to find the highest EV play. This is good. The other way you can go wrong here is you can say, we have better bluffs. Who cares, man? I'm so sick of people trying to play poker by tailoring their hand to their own range without thinking about what their opponent's doing. I'm so sick of this. Like, okay, the range versus range matchup, it does set the context. It lays the landscape for what's going to happen. But you also have to think about what the population, and this was a recreational player, right, that cold called here. What does the recreational population do against a turn bet here? They fold 4s, 6s, 7s, 8s, 9s, 10s, jacks most of the time. They don't have too many good hands here because we know that they're going to bet their king X too often on the flop, not slow play enough. Hello cat in the background, shout out to Bastian, the black and white cat, trotting past right now. And yeah, they're just going to play badly against this, so take the play. Who cares that you have better bluffs? It's not even your job in GTO to bluff flush draws but not other hands. You only need to do that in spots that are really bad for your range. If you're in a spot where your range is getting decimated, then yes, if you're out of position, in theory you do need to have some certain standard about what you lead with. But this is not the same thing. Your range is doing fine here. You're the pre-flop raiser, there's 2 big cards and your opponent checked back the flop. You're okay. Go for a bet. King Jack of Hearts now. Go for the open here. This is the final hand for today. Cutoff raises. If you like the content, by the way, do not forget to smash that like button. And of course, to learn more, right now, you could start your academic journey tonight. You could pick up the Carrot Poker School and begin binge watching 30 episodes of instructional cash game content. 33. I forgot there's exam feedback videos that you can watch. You don't even have to do the exams. You can just binge watch the whole thing and watch the exam feedback without doing the exam. Don't tell anyone I said that though. You're supposed to do the exam and then watch the exam feedback video. But anyway, that's all at carrotcorner.com. We call a 3-bet. The board is 7-6-4 of spades and we have the king jack of hearts. So maybe we should just fold now and just put no money into the pot because this is a terrible spot. But fortunately, our opponent checks back. We're probably folding to like 10th pot there. It's that bad. That's why 10th pot's nice there, by the way. We have so many tragically hopeless hands. Deuce of hearts on the turn. And you guessed it, guys. People are bad at slow playing. My value region, flushes, and sets. 7x, 6x, flushes. We can play a bigger bet here. We can also lead here with 9s, 8s, 10s, jacks with a spade, some pairs without a spade. You can have a block and an overbet here. That's what I would tend to do. Decided to block this time. This gets way less fold equity than the overbet. So why on earth would I want to do it? Because it risks less. It's about risk and reward. You don't just go out and buy the best car in the dealership. You try and get the best deal. So this is getting a very good deal because if you think about it, hands like overpairs that have slow played the flop, they're unlikely to fold to any sizing here. But things like ace king of clubs, ace queen of diamonds, etc., they're going to fold to this size. So while he's kind of capped, their range is polarized here. And I do think that there are some really terrible hands that fold to any size, and then some really good hands that really don't fold to many sizes at all. And when you think that's the way humans are playing, the small bet's really good. We get it through, fist pump. If you give up in this spot and check down King Jack of Hearts to the river because you're not happy with all the spades, then you guessed it. You don't deserve to play the game. This has been Pete Clark of Carrot Corner Poker Education. Start bluffing, start printing money. Let me know how you get on, and I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.